alaikum. I want to start by telling you a short story. And that is when I was a younger woman, when I was a teenager, I grew up in a very liberal college town called Madison, Wisconsin, if any of you are familiar. It's a place that really focuses on social justice. It's a place where there were always a lot of protests against war and against the oppression of people at the hands of our government. It's sometimes called the Berkeley of the Midwest, with a very progressive, left-leaning political and social culture. And I grew up in this town, attending public school, having absolutely almost no Muslim friends. And I had a lot of questions about Islam. I had a lot of questions about Islam specifically from the perspective of the idea of justice. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 15, and I think that was the moment that I really feel that the political consciousness was born inside me, where I felt like I was proud of my Muslim American identity, and I felt that somehow I was responsible for bringing about greater justice to the world. And so, from that perspective, I approached Islam, and specifically, and in the beginning, it was this issue of women in Islam that was such a struggle for me. And I really did struggle with it. And I tell people sometimes, this is a story I don't usually share, but when I'm talking to close friends, I say that I actually wrestled with the Quran about this topic, women in Islam and women in the Quran. And I'm somewhat embarrassed to be speaking on the same panel as Dr. Jamal Badawi, because it was actually at this moment when I was having these struggles that his work really helped me. This is just the truth. But why I tell you this story is this, because I think a lot of people, young and old, maybe sitting in this room, have similar struggles. And I ran across one ayah that just like changed things for me. And it basically, I don't want to repeat it in Arabic because I feel I get it wrong. But what it says is, do not let there be in your heart haraj from anything in this Quran. Do not let there be an uneasiness in your heart from anything in the Quran. It was a command. And so I did things maybe the opposite way than you might think, which is I started by saying, Allah, take away the uneasiness. I don't understand, but I will accept. And it was only then that the understanding flowed. It wasn't my inner peace and my rest with the Quran came after I understood, although that be intuitive. But in fact, it was the other way around. I surrendered. I said, this is from Allah. It must be fair. But I don't understand. And so I started there. And then I went to understand why it was fair. And so that's where the first thing I want to talk about is how do we approach the Quran and Islam when it comes to this topic of women in Islam and the Prophet ﷺ and Islam. It has to be the starting point has to be, this is justice, because Allah is justice. That is one of His attributes, and He would not command except what is just. So if it is being implemented unjustly, then the problem is in the implementation. If our understanding of it it feels unjust, then there is an issue with the way we're understanding it. But we aren't going to convince ourselves it's fair by comparing it to some universal values of what is fair and then saying, see, Islam is just as good as, this feminist manifesto. That's not what we do. Our starting point has to be to work through spiritual purification to remove the haraj from our heart. And to start by understanding the nature of Allah. Before we talk about women's rights in Islam and all the different historical contexts of all these ayahs, that is not the starting point. The starting point is, what is the nature of Allah? The nature of Allah is the just. That's it. You gotta start there. That is the point of departure when we are trying to understand our place as women and our place in terms of gender relations in Islam. Moving from the nature of Allah, the next thing we have to really internalize is the concept of Tawheed. Because if we skip these steps, they seem like, well, that has nothing to do with the topic. It has everything to do with the topic. In fact, I teach a class in Georgetown University to both grad students and undergrads about women in Muslim society. And you know what I spend the first 2 classes teaching? Tawheed. I explain Tawheed to them. And at first they're like, what does this have to do with women in society? I don't understand. This is not a theology class. And by the end, they're like, that was the most important foundation we got because everything else made sense because we understood Tawheed. It's true. Tawheed is so liberating. It is a revolutionary concept when it comes to human liberation. Human liberation, among them women, but everyone else too. Because what Tawheed says, La ilaha illallah. And I take them through this process. I say, what is an ilah? An ilah is an object of worship. What does it mean to worship something? It means to obey it blindly and unquestioningly. It means to make this thing your criteria for what is right and wrong. It means to look to this thing, this ilah, for approval, to affirm yourself, to see if I am worthy or not. And this concept now says that there is nothing like that anymore except God. If you internalize this concept, you become unenslavable. Unenslavable. Why? Well, let's take drug addiction. And I ask any high school or college class I'm in, how many people know a drug addict? Almost everyone raises their hand. Do you know one? Just do you know one? Yeah, I know one. Okay. Think about that person. Have you ever seen them do something humiliating for their drug? Yeah. Okay. Have you ever seen them do something that you know they would never want to do, immoral for that drug? Yes. Have they compromised their values before? You know them. They've compromised their values for the drug? Yes. Now, what happens if they clean up and they're no longer addicted? When they stop submitting to this drug, are they going to have, is the one giving them or taking away that drug have the same power over them? Absolutely not. They become free. They free themselves by relinquishing that false deity called the drug. They become free because they are no longer enslaved to it. And the one who gives them the drug or takes it away no longer has power over them. They are liberated. They are liberated not by submitting to their impulses, which is what media tells you, obey your thirst, that's freedom. No, freedom is not obeying your thirst. That's slavery. And it's so clear when it comes to drug addiction. Obey that thirst, you're a slave to that thirst. They become unenslavable by that drug dealer when they no longer are submitting to that false deity. They become free. By no longer being a slave to that impulse, they become free. So in that very concrete example, what if the only thing you submit to, the only thing that is your ilah, is the one and only thing that no one has the power to give or take away from you. I don't submit to God. I don't submit to money. I don't submit to power. I don't submit to my need for my ego to be stroked. If none of those things are things that I am addicted to, then how do you enslave me? If I only submit to the one thing you have no power over, which is God, how do you enslave me? Well, guess what? You can't. And that's the first thing you have to understand when it comes to how the Prophet dealt with women. Is he communicated, he conveyed to us this message of Tawheed, of human liberation at such a profound level that we are struggling today in this modern liberal world to even understand it. True freedom. True liberation in a way where you cannot be enslaved. And that's number one. Tawheed is the way that the Prophet ﷺ liberated women. He also gave us a purpose as individuals, separate from our value as mothers, wives, sisters. This is really important, and don't take this for granted. Because I would argue, even in the modern West, let alone just historically, women were valued in as much as they were beneficial or at the service of or useful to men. She is a good wife. She is a good mother. Those are all wonderful roles to play, and we need to play them, and they are honored roles. But our first role, the Prophet taught by conveying the Quran, that Allah said, "Inni ja'alun fil ard khalifa." That your primary role before you're a mother or a daughter or a sister or a wife is a khalifa on this earth. That is what Allah said when He created us as human beings. The one entrusted with fulfilling His purpose, for fulfilling His will, a khalifa on earth, to have the value of being human just for the sake of yourself. That a woman, when you hear these things, oh, she never got married, subhanAllah. What use does she have in the world? They have completely missed the message of the Quran. Because a man and a woman, whoever you are, as a human being, your first purpose is as a servant of Allah, as His Khalifa, the most honored purpose. And Allah gave us this. In that same story, and we go through this Quranic rendition, I teach at a Catholic school, right? So most of the students are Catholic, and definitely most of them are Christians. And when they read the story, and it's really sometimes really kind of interesting and enlightening to see the Quran through the eyes of someone who doesn't take it for granted. Like, if you only know the story of Adam and Hawa alayhim salam through the Muslim rendition, through the Muslim narrative, it almost doesn't seem remarkable. Like, oh yeah, well, of course. What else would it be? But they know a totally different story, and when they read that story, they are completely blown away. These are young women in their 20s, liberal, progressive feminists. They would all call themselves feminists. And when they read this story, they are completely blown away. Because Hawa is not blamed for the fall of man. It's like, of course she's not. Why would she be? But a lot of people believe she was. And there's a lot in... This is the thing, there's a lot in the way that people criticize Islam that is actually them responding to a Judeo-Christian rendition of stories, and they don't understand there's a difference. Hijab is spoken about in the Bible. And many people say this, and it's true, of course, but do you know how it's spoken about? Do you understand what hijab, what people, what the Bible says about hijab? Why women should cover? As a symbol of her inferiority and the fact that her husband owns her. Look it up. It's not me. I'm just a messenger. So hijab is a symbol of inferiority. It's actually how it cover her head as a symbol of her subordination. This is literally what it says. And so when people read that in the Bible, they assume, oh, wow, you guys have your head covered. Oh, we stopped doing that because we think we're equal. We're equal, so we don't do that anymore. And I was always like, well, why would covering my head not make me equal? And I didn't understand until I read this verse, but I'm like, oh, you guys think that no, big misunderstanding. Totally different. So the story of the beginning of humanity is so profound and important because the spiritual equality of men and women was enshrined in that story. I want to just point out a few things about this story that I think are amazing. First, Shaitan tempted both of them. In some parts of the Quran, it says he tempted Adam. But in any case, and in others, it says both of them. Shaitan tempted both of them. They both made a mistake. They both, gave in to that desire. And then they both, had to leave heaven. But here's a really important point about that. It wasn't Eve's fault, right? She's not the temptress. That's not how women are positioned. They were human. They had desires like men. They made the mistake. They were both led astray by Shaitan. And then here's the most important thing. The beginning of man was not original sin. It was original forgiveness. Because before they were actually sent to earth, look at the exact narration of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is amazing. Allah expressed His disapproval and anger at what they had done. But then, immediately after that, He revealed words of forgiveness. And these words of forgiveness forgave them. So the beginning of human beings wasn't a sin. It was actually a forgiveness. That was the last thing that happened before they touched earth. That's how we started. By being forgiven. By slipping up and being forgiven. Not by sinning a sin so great that it has now, cursed humanity for all of time and it was because of a woman. No. Totally different. Slight variation in the story with really big differences. To start humanity off as khalifas on earth, men and women, and as those who were forgiven before touching earth. And the first sin, as we all know, was the sin of arrogance. It wasn't Adam and Eve that committed the first sin. It wasn't Hawa and Adam, it was Shaitan. His was the first sin. The original sin was that of arrogance, or that of racism, sometimes people say, or racism because of arrogance. That's original sin. The thing that happened to human beings before touching earth was original forgiveness. So when taking it back to today's society, I always heard talks about men and women in Islam, and a lot of times we would talk about the historical context of Arabia, and things were so awful there, and girls were being buried, and Islam came to end that. And that's great, and we should recognize that. But then the response of many young women is like, well, great, but I don't live in 7 AD Arabia, and I'm in no danger of being buried, so is Islam really liberating me now? And the answer is yes, it is. And here's the thing, here's why, and this is so central. What Islam offers us, before we get into the rules and the laws and the rights, what Islam offers us is a God-centered paradigm. And in today's world, we don't have a God-centered paradigm. In the secular West, it is a male-centered paradigm. And I will prove to you that it is a male-centered paradigm where women are doing one of two things. They are either trying to affirm their value as human beings by appealing to men or by emulating men. When you set up men as the center or the standard by which we should measure everything, when you have a male-centered paradigm, and when I say male-centered, why is it male-centered? Because when you remove God, how are you going to know what's strong, or what you should do and what you shouldn't do? Where does your criteria for things come from? Usually it's, well, what works? Who's powerful? Who's getting things done? Who's historically been the one leading everything? Remove God, then what do you have left? The powerful on earth. Who just happened to be the powerful on earth? Anyone? I'm going to tell you, it's men. Right? The CEOs, the heads of state, they're all men, right? With very few exceptions. So when you remove God from the picture, you are left with the powerful on earth, and they become the criteria. They are the center. And so you leave women in a state where they are either trying to win the approval of men, and that's an entire industry, for everything from clothing to cosmetics to plastic surgery. That's one. Or they're trying to be men. And that's also an entire industry where women, and I worked in the corporate world, I not really anymore, but what women in the corporate world are expected to do is to leave their femininity at the door if they want to get anywhere. You are expected to become male in everything you can, to be, quote, equal. Crying, ooh, that's weak. Anything that shows the slightest bit of a variation from what the male standard of being. What a God-centered paradigm gives you is the ability to be who you are and not have this standard that you have to be compared to all the time. You have the permission to be who you are and still equal because you are deriving your value from God, not from how close you imitate the standard men or how well you are able to attract their attention. Take away God, what you're left with is the powerful on earth, which is men, and that's a male-centered paradigm. So when people are asking, how does Islam liberate women today and not 1,400 years ago? That's how. Because it gives us a standard that we are equally able to access, which is God. Here's the thing about imitation. You know, I studied marketing, and there's something really interesting about branding. Every brand, and you can study this, every brand wants to appear unique. No brand says, I'm just like this other brand, right? If you go and look at, perfume, obsession is not saying, I'm exactly like, Guess perfume. No, they're trying to push for the fact that they are unique. When a brand is unique and one of a kind, it can charge a lot of money. That's how it works. The more unique you are, the more valuable you are. If you're one of a kind, the only, the Hope Diamond, then you're priceless. What's the only kind of brand that is desperate to tell you it's just like something else? The imitation brand at the grocery store. I'm cheap, but I'm just like obsession. So what kind of brand is desperate and running after trying to be something else? An inferior brand. So when women are trying to run and insist they're exactly like men, now that's different. I'm not saying we don't need equal rights. Don't misunderstand me. But when we forsake our nature and see it as inferior and insist that there are no differences, I'm just like a man. You have set him up as the Gucci, and you're the one trying to imitate. You're the imitation brand at the grocery store. Islam says no, we are allowed our uniqueness. And that uniqueness is honored. How is that uniqueness honored? I only have 5 minutes and I didn't get through most of this, but that's okay. We can cover a lot more in the Q&A. I want to talk to you about rahmah. Rahmah is a quality that is so revered in Islam. Allah describes himself more times than any other quality using this quality, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Allah says to us, tells us that his rahmah overtakes his wrath. He described his rahmah in a very interesting way. He said that he gave one part of his rahmah to all the mothers on earth so that they could care for their young, and kept 99 parts of his rahmah for himself to use on us when he is judging us on the Day of Judgment. It's interesting he said mothers. And it's interesting that in a Sahih Hadith, the word rahmah was explained as coming from the root rahim, womb, the womb of a mother. Do men have wombs? No. So this rahmah, this unique quality, everyone can have rahmah, but for it to come from this root of something that is uniquely female, that means that the unique nature of women is something that Allah told us was something incredibly precious, something we should feel incredible honor that we have. If anyone tells you that this side of you, your rahmah, your softness, your femininity, is a weakness, they don't understand this concept of rahmah. And there are things that because of the rahmah that we have been gifted with, because of this rahim, because of this place, this nature of having this one part rahmah shared among us as mothers, as females, there are things that accommodate that in the Sharia, in the way the law is written, in the way the law is revealed. But it is not an inferior quality. It is a uniqueness that we should not run away from. Because when you have a God-centered paradigm, your uniqueness and the way Allah created you can never be an inferiority. It is exactly as you should be, which is what the Prophet taught. I'm going to just end with one story, specifically about Rasulullah. And there's so many examples of the way he dealt with women, the way he treated women, the way he interacted with women. But one that I think conveys a very important story, a very important lesson, which is that the Prophet ﷺ was surrounded by women, and they were among his advisors. Because a lot of times the idea is, women are, sometimes when we talk about how things happened and what, the role of women in the first generation, people will respond to it who aren't used to the stories, people of other faiths, and they'll say, it sounds kind of patronizing. It's like, well, women are sort of treated like, with kindness, like you would talk about like a a dog with a broken leg or something. That's how it strikes people sometimes. And I think it's the way we're telling the story. I think it's the stories that we're choosing to focus on. But here's one that I think we need to talk about, which is that women were political advisors to the Prophet ﷺ. The story of Hudaybiyah, and anyone who was in Nu'man Ali Khan's talk heard it. But to summarize very quickly, the Prophet ﷺ and the companion had a dream that he was going to Hajj. So this was a call. He felt that it was time to go back to Mecca as a pilgrim. He took a group, and Salama, one of his wives, came with them to go to Hajj, but they found out that the Quraysh were going to intercept them on their normal route. So they had to take a different route, which was incredibly difficult, filled with thorns. Their legs were bleeding, moving through this route just because it was safe. And they went into Hudaybiyah. And this is why it's called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And there they found a negotiator from the Quraysh who said, okay, we're going to negotiate a peace treaty. There's a number of conditions. And they were very difficult conditions. If you read the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, at the time people were really demoralized, including Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who was incredibly angry at the fact that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims had agreed to what seemed to be a very unfair treaty, a humiliating treaty. And they had gone out as pilgrims in their ihram and were so excited about going to Hajj. If any of you have gone to Hajj and have had a problem within that process where it felt like you weren't going to get to go through with it, the devastation inside you, that all this hardship, you've come this long way and they've walked this incredibly difficult path, and now they were told you can't go this year. So this feeling, the morale of the companions. And the Prophet ﷺ was advised, in the midst of this incredibly difficult moment, politically, socially, in the heart of people, they were really feeling broken. It was Salama who advised the Prophet ﷺ to cut his hair like at the end of your ihram. And she said, if you do it, they will follow you. As if we have gone to Hajj and come back. As if the opening was that the Hajj was accepted. It was her who advised him. So women among the Prophet ﷺ were his companions, the companions of the Prophet, not the disciples, but the way he talks about those who were around him, men and women alike. They were people that engaged with him, even as advisors. Thank you.